Hi, I'm Ricky. Today we're on the 7th episode of the Endless Runner series. Today we'll take a look on how to implement a pause to our game. I know I said that we'll be looking at an audio system for this episode too, but I really didn't have enough time, so stick with me and we'll see audio in the next episode. Also, shout out to my Milanese friends that live in the red zone like me. Alright, let's start. First thing we want to do is make a new script and we call it Pause Manager. In here, we want a value that holds whether the game is paused or not, and a function that toggles the pause based on that value. So first, let's make a private bool called isGamePaused. And now let's make a function which will be a public void, and we call it togglePause. We make it public because we want to use this from a button in-game. Now first thing, let's reverse our isGamePaused. And then based on this value, we pause the game or we unpause it. Okay, and in here we want to pause the game, so we set the timescale to 0. And in here we want to unpause the game, so we set it to 1. Very good. Now let's go to Unity. Let's add our pause manager to our game manager. And let's make a new button so I can pause the game in-game. So let's open our canvas. Let's hide our shop, and you can press the I here or press H. And at the top we want to make a new button. Now we don't need a text, so it doesn't matter which prefab you choose, because we will be deleting this. Okay, let's put this up. And I'm gonna put it in the top right corner. Now I've already downloaded an image, you can check it in the description, which is this one right here. So you select the button and put it in the source image. I'm gonna set the anchor to be top right, and I'm gonna call it pause button. Very good. Now let's organize things a bit here. Let's make a new panel that will hold the stuff that happens during our game. We have a panel for game over, we have a panel for shop, so let's make a panel for our game. As you can see, I only made a new panel that's set to all stretch corners, and I've disabled the image. I've put both the pause button and the yard text inside, so if we disable the game panel, all the stuff is gone. Now let's link our pause button event to our pause manager. In here we can just use the onClick event, but it will be very unresponsive. We want the pause to be very quick. OnClick event doesn't trigger when you press the button, it triggers when you release your finger. It will be much better for a function as important as pause to trigger as soon as you touch it. So instead of onClick event, we use pointer down. To do that, we need to add a new component, and it's called event trigger. And in here we can choose what type of event we want to add. In this case, we want pointer down, which triggers much like input.getKeyDown, so as soon as you touch that button. So let's add this. And here it works just like on click event. We add a new event, we drag our game manager, we select our pause manager, and we select toggle pause. So let's test this. And as you can see, when I press pause, the game freezes, and when I press it again, the game goes back to normal. There's a problem though. Right now we are testing it on a computer, so you can't see it, but if we were playing on the phone, the pause button, being on the right side of the screen, also makes you float to the right. That is because in our boat movement script, we made it so that we go to the right whenever we touch the right side of the screen with no limitations whatsoever. So let's go to our boat movement script and let's add a limitation. In here we want to add a value that checks whether the side of the screen that we're touching is valid or not. And I'm gonna call it a serialized private float Y margin for input. And by default I'm gonna set it to true. To show you what you will do, let's go to Unity and let's select our boat. Basically what we are doing is when we touch a screen, we want our touch to be registered only if it goes to a certain height. So if it goes above here, we don't want the input to be registered, only if we touch this side of the screen. So in here we take our boat and we go, let's say here is a top side, so more than here we don't want to register a screen. You can see it's 235, so in our Y margin we set the value to 235. Now back to our script. Now in our fixed update we don't want our touch to be registered if you go above that value. So in our mobile part of the script, and I'm gonna add a comment in here to be a bit more clear. In here we just add a new if statement to check whether our touch position.y is less than our margin. And we just put the other if statements inside. Perfect. While we're here, let's also add a quick fix. Right now we are in the fixed update method, but in our movement section we are actually multiplying things with time.delta_time. And it doesn't really matter right now because we're doing a very arcadish and very static movements. But when you are in the fixed update, you should use time.fixed_delta_time. Like so. Physics are very easy to mess up, so it's always a good thing to remember to use the right time.delta_time. But again, in this case, it didn't really matter because we're using a very static way of using physics. We're just setting a velocity, we're not adding forces. But it's a good thing to know for future cases. Okay, let's go back to our pose manager. In here, there are a lot of features that we can add. First one I want to make is a value that holds whether we can pause the game or not. So I'm going to make a private bool and call it canPause. And by default, I'm also setting it to true. Now, we want a way to know whether we can pause the game or not, because let's say we are in the middle of a cutscene or a dialogue, we don't want the player to be able to pause the game. So when we want to make a section of the game to be unpausable, we just set this value to false and then set it back to true when we exit that stage. To actually have this value do something, we go in our toggle pause function, and at the start we just check whether this value is false. And if it is false, we just return the function. Perfect. Now let's make a new public function to actually change this value. And I'm gonna call it changePose2. And it's gonna need a boolean parameter so you can change or canPause to that boolean. And in here we just say canPause equals changeIt2. Right now we don't have sections of the game where we want our player to not be able to pause the game, so we don't actually use this function right now, but it's good for future reference. Okay, and next thing, right now we are setting the timescale to 0 when we pause and to 1 when we unpause. But here's the thing, when we set the timescale to 0 to pause the game, there's no problem. But when we unpause the game, we don't know whether the timescale before pausing the game was actually 1. Let's say we are in the middle of a slow motion effect, the timescale will be less than 1. So we want to know what the timescale was equal to before we pause the game, and when we unpause, we set it to what it was before. To do that, we use a new float value, and I'm gonna call it time before pause. And when we pause the game, we save it. And when we unpause the game, instead of setting the timescale to 1, we set it to time before pause. This feature here also won't be shown in the game right now because we don't have any kind of slow motion effect, but we will have a slow motion effect in a future episode, so it's good for future reference. Okay, and next thing, I want to add a pause text that will be shown when we pause the game. So let's go to Unity, and in our game panel, let's make a new text. Let's call it pause text. And I'm just gonna make it a bit prettier. Okay, let's go back to our pause manager. And in here we will make a reference to the pause text, but since we only want to activate it or deactivate it, we don't need a reference to the text, we just need a reference to the game object. A quick tip on how to organize your stuff. I like to put external reference at the top, while internal values at the bottom. And when I'm using classes like game object or text, I like to put what class I'm using at the last bit. In this case, I'm using GO to say game object. And now when we pause the game, we just activate our pause text go and deactivate it when we unpause. Okay, let's go to Unity. Let's link our pause text game object and let's test this. But first, we need to disable it. Okay. As you can see, when I pause the game, the pause text appears, and when I unpause, it disappears. Perfect. And the last thing I want to make is to change our pause button to change to a play button when we want to unpause the game. I already have the sprite downloaded, it's this one right here. So let's go to our pause manager, and here we want a reference to the image of the button, and we also have to sort the two sprites I will be switching through. So let's start by making the image reference. And we also have to add the unityengine.ui library. Okay, and let me actually switch that, and let's add the two sprites. Okay, so I made a pause button sprite and a play button sprite, and in our inspector we're just gonna add those images. So let's go to Unity, and I'm gonna take our pause button in here, our pause button image, and our play button image. Perfect. Back in our script, we just want to change the image of our pause button image to one of the sprites based on whether we pause the game or we unpause it. So in here, when we pause the game, we just take our pause button image, and we want to access our source image. We do that with the dot sprite. And in here, we set it to play button sprite, while in here, we set it to pause button sprite. Okay, let's test that. So at the start, the pause is set to pause. When we press it, it goes to play, and then it goes back to pause. It's a bit over the top right now, so I'm gonna fix it in the UI. Okay, and that should be good. And we're actually done here. So that was it for this episode. I know it's a shorter one, but it's still useful to know how to pause and unpause a game. Next week, we're gonna see how to make an audio system, so make sure not to miss that. If you have any questions about the code or what the episode will be, or if you have any requests on what to do next, be sure to tell me in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more of this content. Alright, and I'll see you in the next video.